Welcome into Mock Trial Masterclass, your guide to controlling the courtroom. I'm Luke, and I want you to be a mock trial master. Let's talk about how you can make that happen. Objections can be one of the most complicated, overwhelming, and uncomfortable parts of a trial. But when you get them right, they can be super exciting and they can completely set you apart from the competition. So what we're going to talk about in this video is how you can make awesome objections every single time. When it comes to making objections, there's really only three things you need to remember for every single one of them to be a powerhouse objection. The first thing you got to remember is that every objection must cite a rule. Let's think about why we have objections for a second, because when we make an objection and we look at the judge and we say, objection hearsay, objection relevance, objection improper character evidence, whatever the rule is, when we're looking at the judge and saying that, what we're really in effect saying is, judge, for one reason or another, based on the rules, this is not allowed. And that's because with an objection, it all comes down to the rules of evidence, and for one reason or another, the thing we're objecting to not being allowed. So if the reason that we object to something is because it's not allowed, doesn't it make sense that we should cite a rule when we make the objection? Now, that doesn't mean you have to cite a rule number. You don't have to be a super nerd and get up there and say objection 602, objection 401, or whatever the rule number might be. It just means that when you make an objection, there must be a rule attached to it, like relevance, hearsay, improper character evidence, speculation, improper expert opinion, improper lay witness opinion. Whatever the rule is, you have to have one. Now, what happens if you don't have a rule attached to the objection? Well, that's when you start to get into the realm of what is called weight arguments. That's when, instead of making an objection that is tied to a rule where you're looking at the judge and saying this is not allowed, that's when you look at a judge and say this is not reliable. The time to handle those types of arguments where, for one reason or another, you're concerned with how reliable a piece of evidence is, that's for cross-examination. But when it comes to objections, all we care about is it allowed? So when you make an objection, it has to have a rule attached to it. The second thing you need to remember about objections is that you need to make the other side do the work. Here's what that means. When you make an objection, you should really keep it to 5 words or less. So let's look at a hearsay objection, right? There are a lot of different ways you can make a hearsay objection to keep it 5 words or less. Objection hearsay, 2 words. Objection, this is hearsay. I think that's 4 words. Might be wrong. Correct me in the comments if I am. Right? You could say objection rule 801, because 801 is the rule against hearsay. Right? There's all kinds of different ways you can make the objection to keep it under that 5-word maximum. There are also a lot of ways you can make an objection that take it over that 5-word maximum, and that usually looks something like getting up and saying, objection, for one reason or another, this is hearsay, and then you launch into this long, complicated argument that I promise you no one wants to hear. The reason no one wants to hear that is a couple of reasons. First of all, when we do that, when we make those long-winded arguments in an objection, it's called a speaking objection, and in a lot of places around the country, they're not even allowed in courtrooms. In most places, most judges especially, don't like speaking objections. And so another reason that we don't make speaking objections is because when we make speaking objections, it makes life way too easy on our opponent. Think of it this way. If you're going into a competition and you know the rules of evidence like the back of your hand, and you're very, very prepared, and you stand up and you make an objection and your opponent is not in that situation, then on the spot, they're going to have to come up with something because you've just objected and put them in that position. But when you start to get into a speaking objection and you start to make the argument and explain everything, you take all the work away from your opponent. They no longer have to rack their own brains to arrive at the meaning and the definition of the rule you objected to, because you handed it to them on a silver platter. So instead of launching into those long arguments that, again, I promise no one wants to hear, just keep it to 5 words or less and make your opponent do the work, not you. Let's work smarter, not harder here. So the first thing we did is we cited a rule. The second thing we always do is we make our opponent do the work. And the third thing we do when making objections to make all of them awesome is we pick our spots strategically. What that means is that we don't object to a million different things in every round. We try to keep it to a minimum. I've seen a lot of teams that it almost seemed like their whole strategy in a round was just to object to everything, almost like they were, throwing them at the wall to see what would stick. And teams like that aren't successful because just about any scoring judge is going to be able to see through that. So what do you do to avoid that happening? Here's the question I want you to ask yourself from now on before you make an objection. Can I win this objection? Do you think you're going to win the objection? Because if you don't think you're going to win it, then don't make the objection. Now, there are some times maybe where you'll want to make an objection that you don't think you're going to win for a very specific strategic reason. And I would encourage you to talk to your coach about those and to plan those in advance. When you're sitting in a round and making the decision in the moment, should I object to this? Ask yourself that question. Can I win the objection? If the answer is no, don't make it. Because when you start to object to things that you don't think you can win, that's how you wind up in these situations where you're objecting to a million different things and just seeing what will stick against the wall. So let's recap the 3 things that every good objection needs to be just awesome every single time. You got to cite a rule because that's the whole reason we're doing this in the first place. We object because something is against the rules. The second thing is we keep it to that 5-word maximum, and we make our opponent do the work. And finally, the third thing we have to remember with objections is we pick our spots strategically. We don't object to every little thing we hear that may or may not have a chance to, lend to a winning objection. We don't object to everything. Instead, we pick our spots and we ask ourselves, do I have a chance to win this? Appreciate you tuning in to this video. And by the way, if you want to spend some time one-on-one with me, or maybe you want me to come speak to your team over Zoom, I'd be happy to do that. And there's a link in the description that will let you sign up for coaching with me. It'll be super fun, and I will help you take your game to the next level because I know you're capable of being a mock trial master.